Author Michael Wolff has claimed in a lawsuit that First Lady Melania Trump threatened to sue him for over $1 billion in damages if he didn't retract Jeffrey Epstein-related statements he made about her. Wolff said in the lawsuit that Melania Trump's threat to sue came over statements he made to the Daily Beast and in 3 videos published on social media, although he added some statements were incomplete phrases and were taken out of context. The lawsuit came on Tuesday, the deadline set by Melania Trump's lawyer for Wolff to retract statements, issue an apology, and pay damages to his client. Through his lawsuit, Wolff announced his intention to use the legal action to put the president and his wife under oath to answer questions about Epstein. Wolff conducted interviews with Epstein before his death. The lawsuit noted that Wolff never said Melania Trump was involved in any of Epstein's crimes. Among the statements the lawsuit said were true were those saying Melania Trump was very involved in Epstein's social circle where she met her future husband, and that it was fair to question how Melania Trump fits into the Epstein story. Wolff has published a dozen books, including 4.
Hey everyone, welcome. Jack Mockler is here again. Melania Trump, the sitting First Lady of the United States, and a lawsuit that has her legal team scrambling like they are trying to put out a fire with a garden hose. They are dodging, they are delaying, they are throwing up every procedural roadblock you can imagine. And for what? To avoid one very simple, very ordinary thing. A sworn declaration. A piece of paper signed under oath. That is it. That is the thing they cannot seem to bring themselves to do. And when you stop and ask yourself why someone would go to such extraordinary lengths to avoid putting their name on a statement as basic as where they live,
a dramatic legal showdown involving First Lady Melania Trump, best-selling Trump biographer Michael Wolff, and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein has taken another explosive turn. According to Radar Online, a federal judge has officially dismissed Wolff's anti-SLAPP lawsuit against Melania Trump, handing the First Lady a major courtroom victory after months of legal threats and shocking allegations connected to Epstein's inner circle. The controversy reportedly began after Michael Wolff made explosive claims during multiple podcast appearances and media interviews. According to the Daily Beast, Wolff alleged that Melania Trump first met Donald Trump through Jeffrey Epstein's social network and even suggested Trump's early relationship with Melania involved Epstein's private jet. Wolff also referenced alleged recordings involving Epstein himself, triggering immediate backlash from Melania's legal team.
well, that question alone tells you everything you need to know about what might be hiding just beneath the surface. Let me take you back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without understanding how we got here. Michael Wolff is a journalist who has spent years writing about Donald Trump and the people in his orbit. He has published books, articles, investigations, and along the way, he made statements connecting Melania Trump to 2 names that have become absolutely toxic in the public imagination: Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, you do not need me to remind you what those 2 names represent.
Melania Trump's attorney, Alejandro Brito, reportedly fired off a legal warning threatening a massive $1 billion lawsuit unless Wolff publicly retracted the controversial remarks. Wolff then responded by filing an anti-SLAPP lawsuit in October 2025, arguing that Melania's legal threats were designed to intimidate journalists and silence criticism through aggressive courtroom tactics targeting protected free speech. At the center of the legal battle was Wolff's argument that New York's anti-SLAPP protections shield journalists and commentators from lawsuits intended to suppress public discussion. According to NBC News, Wolff insisted many of his comments amounted to opinion rather than factual accusations, and stressed that he never directly accused Melania Trump of participating in Jeffrey Epstein's criminal conduct.
A criminal enterprise of staggering proportions. A trafficking network that reached into the highest levels of politics, finance, and media. A web of powerful people who somehow always seemed to be nearby when things went wrong. When Wolff made those connections public, Melania did not respond with a quiet correction or a measured denial. She came out swinging with everything she had. In the fall of 2025, She issued what can only be described as a legal nuclear threat. She told Wolff to retract his statements immediately, to issue a public apology groveling at her feet, or she would drag him into court and sue him for defamation to the tune of $1 billion.
But late Friday, U.S. District Judge Mary Kay Weisgassel, who was appointed by Donald Trump, completely dismissed Wolff's lawsuit in a blistering 45-page ruling. The judge sharply criticized the case, writing that Wolff was effectively asking the court to rule on a lawsuit that had not even been formally filed yet. The judge declared that federal courts do not operate by issuing hypothetical victories before legal action officially exists. Despite dismissing the lawsuit, Judge Weisgassel reportedly criticized both sides for what she described as an inappropriate level of tactical gamesmanship. According to court documents cited by multiple outlets, the judge said the federal court system would not be conscripted to oversee an abusively presented spat, signaling frustration with how the high-profile legal feud had spiraled into a public spectacle involving celebrity politics and Epstein-related allegations.
Let that number echo in your head for a moment. $1 billion. That is not a serious legal claim. That is intimidation. That is a message designed to make every journalist in America think twice before ever putting her name in the same sentence as Epstein or Maxwell again. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. Michael Wolff is not some frightened blogger who can be bullied into silence with a scary letter from a law firm. He is a seasoned journalist who has spent his entire career navigating the most litigious and dangerous people on the planet. He has been threatened before. He has been sued before. And he has learned exactly how to handle people who try to use the legal system as a weapon instead of a shield.
Meanwhile, Wolff's legal battle had reportedly attracted major public attention online. Reports claimed the controversial Trump author raised nearly $800,000 in small dollar donations from supporters to fund the anti-slap fight against Melania Trump. Wolff reportedly hoped the case would establish legal protections for journalists facing lawsuits or legal threats from wealthy and politically powerful public figures.
The lies linking me with the disgraceful Jeffrey Epstein need to end today. The individuals lying about me are devoid of ethical standards, humility, and respect. I do not object to their ignorance, but rather I reject their mean-spirited attempts to defame my reputation. I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach.
So when Melania dropped that billion-dollar hammer, Wolff did something that clearly caught her entire team off guard. He did not apologize. He did not retract a single word. He went on offense. He filed his own lawsuit against Melania Trump in New York State Court, arguing that her legal threat was an unconstitutional attack on his First Amendment rights, his right to free speech, his right to freedom of the press, his right to report the news without living in fear of financial annihilation. He essentially looked her in the eye and said, "You want to play legal games? Fine. But we are playing on my field, by my rules, and we are starting right now." And that is precisely when everything started going sideways for Melania's legal team. Because once Wolff filed his lawsuit and tried to officially deliver the court papers to her, something very strange happened. The First Lady of the United States, one of the most recognizable, most photographed, most closely watched women on the face of the earth, somehow became impossible to locate. I want you to think about how absurd that sounds. She has Secret Service protection 24 hours a day. She travels in motorcades. She appears at official functions. She is surrounded at all times by armed agents and staff members and aides. And yet her lawyers stood up in court and argued that serving her with legal documents was essentially impractical because of her status. They claimed her security detail made her unreachable. They claimed the normal rules of service could not apply to someone with her level of protection. But here is what you need to understand about that argument. This was the same woman who had just threatened to sue a journalist for $1 billion. The same woman who wanted to drag him into court and make him bleed financially. And the moment the tables turned, the moment she became the defendant instead of the potential plaintiff, she was suddenly nowhere to be found. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern of behavior. That is someone who loves making threats, but absolutely hates receiving them. So let me ask you a very direct question. If you were confident in your position, if you believed a journalist had defamed you with false statements, if you had the evidence to prove your case in a court of law, why would you run from a lawsuit? Why would you make yourself invisible? Why would you throw up procedural roadblocks instead of walking into court and saying, "Let us settle this right now in front of a judge and jury"? The answer, I believe, is staring us right in the face. She is not afraid of Michael Wolff. She is afraid of what comes next. She is afraid of discovery. She is afraid of depositions. She is afraid of sworn testimony. And that fear is driving every single decision her legal team has made since this fight began. After the embarrassing spectacle of trying to dodge service of process, Melania's lawyers shifted to a new strategy. They filed a motion asking to move the entire case from New York State Court to federal court. Now, for those of you who do not spend your days reading legal briefs and studying civil procedure, moving a case to federal court requires meeting specific legal conditions. One of the most common is something called diversity jurisdiction, which basically means the two parties have to be legal residents of different states, and the amount of money being disputed has to exceed $75,000. So Melania's team argued that she is not a New Yorker at all. They said her true home is Florida. They said she lives at Mar-a-Lago, that she sleeps there, that her life is centered there. And if that is true, they argued, then diversity jurisdiction applies, and the case belongs in federal court, not state court. And if they can get it into federal court in New York, the next step would be to ask for it to be transferred down to Florida. And why Florida? Because Florida is where a particular judge named Eileen Cannon presides. The same judge who has made multiple rulings favorable to Donald Trump in the past. The same judge whose decisions have been questioned by legal ethics experts and appellate courts. Wolff called this exactly what it is: forum shopping, judge shopping, a transparent attempt to get this case in front of someone who might dismiss it quickly, or drag it out so long that everyone forgets about it. But Michael Wolff is no amateur when it comes to legal strategy. He anticipated this move, and he countered it with something genuinely clever. He looked at his own claimed damages and deliberately kept them under $25,000. Think about the brilliance of that move for a second. He is not trying to get rich off this lawsuit. He is not asking for millions of dollars. He is not trying to punish Melania financially. He is asking for a modest amount of money to compensate him for the chilling effect her billion-dollar threat had on his ability to report the news and exercise his First Amendment rights. By keeping his damages below the federal threshold, he completely undermined the jurisdictional argument. If the amount of money in controversy is too small for federal court, then the whole basis for moving the case collapses. It was a surgical strike, precise and devastating, and it left Melania's lawyers scrambling to find a new angle. Now we arrive at the absolute heart of this entire mess, the residency question. The thing that nobody on Melania's side seems to want to talk about directly or honestly. Her legal team is insisting she is a Florida resident. Fine, that is a factual claim. And how do you prove a factual claim in a court of law? You provide evidence. You provide sworn declarations. You provide affidavits signed under penalty of perjury. You have the person herself raise her right hand and say, "I swear that I live in Florida. This is my home. This is where I sleep. This is where I eat breakfast. This is where my personal belongings are kept. This is where my life is centered." That is not a high bar. That is the bare minimum requirement when you are trying to establish citizenship for jurisdictional purposes. That is something that happens thousands of times every day in courthouses across America. But Melania has not done that. Her lawyers have not done that. Nobody on her side has submitted anything under oath. Not one sworn statement. Not one signed declaration. Not one affidavit. What they submitted instead was a memorandum of law, which is just a fancy legal term for a lawyer writing a legal argument. A memo of law is not evidence. It carries no weight under oath. It is just words on paper with no penalty for falsehood. You cannot prove where someone lives with a memo. You prove it with sworn testimony. And they have provided none. Wolff's team jumped on this failure immediately and aggressively. They pointed out to the federal judge that all Melania had offered was a Florida driver's license and a Florida voter registration. Conclusory claims with no sworn backing whatsoever. No declaration from her. No statement from anyone who actually knows where she spends her nights. And here is the devastating part. Wolff submitted a detailed, fact-filled declaration about Melania's activities and presence in New York. He talked about her apartment in Trump Tower, not the penthouse where Donald Trump stays when he is in town, but a separate unit entirely. He talked to building staff, to doormen, to people who work in the lobby of Trump Tower, and they indicated that Melania is a regular fixture there. She comes and goes. She has belongings there. She interacts with staff. She treats the place like a home. He pointed to her own social media posts, including one from not long ago where she called New York City home and gushed about how it had captured her heart the moment she arrived nearly 3 decades ago. She described it as an electrifying town. She praised its iconic skyline. Those are not the words of someone who considers Florida their permanent residence. Those are the words of someone who loves New York and lives there. Wolff's team also pointed to her own documentary, a film called Melania, that was produced with her cooperation and participation. In that film, her staff, her production team, her creative collaborators are all based in New York, not Florida. And then there are the Epstein files themselves, the documents that keep surfacing, the connections that keep pulling New York back into the picture, including a remarkable email exchange from 2002 between Melania and Ghislaine Maxwell. In this email, Maxwell addresses Melania as Sweet Pea. Let me say that again, Sweet Pea. That is not the language of a formal acquaintance. That is the language of friendship, of warmth, of two women who clearly knew each other well enough to have pet names for one another. In that same exchange, Melania wrote to Maxwell expressing excitement about a New York Magazine profile that featured Jeffrey Epstein. She told Maxwell she looked great in the photos. She asked about plans to meet up in New York. She wrote about looking forward to visiting Palm Beach, but framed it as a trip from New York, not as a trip home. She signed off by telling Maxwell to call her when she was back in New York. This is not the correspondence of strangers. This is not two people who happen to be in the same room once at a party. This is a chatty, friendly, familiar exchange between two women who clearly ran in the same social circles, attended the same events, knew the same people, and made plans to see each other regularly. Now, what is Melania's actual grievance against Wolff? What is the specific claim she says is defamatory? She says Wolff falsely claimed that Jeffrey Epstein was the one who introduced her to Donald Trump. She says that is not true. She says she met Trump through a man named Paolo Zampoli, a modeling agent who used to throw parties at a New York venue called the Kit Kat Club. At these parties, wealthy Manhattan businessmen would mingle with young Eastern European models. That is her story. Maybe it is accurate. Maybe Zampoli really was the one who made the introduction. But notice carefully what that argument does not address. It does not explain the warm, familiar correspondence with Ghislaine Maxwell. It does not explain the social connections to Jeffrey Epstein. It does not explain why she was attending the same parties, photographed at the same events, moving through the same social universe as two of the most notorious figures of the modern era. The narrow question of who introduced her to her husband is being used as a shield to avoid the much larger question of what her relationship with Epstein and Maxwell actually looked like over the years. And that larger question is the one her legal team seems desperate to keep buried under as many layers of procedural noise as possible. Here is why this is so personally dangerous for Melania. If this case proceeds, if it stays in New York State Court as Wolff is demanding, and if a judge orders discovery, then the floodgates open in ways that should make her team very nervous. She will be deposed. Her lawyers will be deposed. Documents will be subpoenaed. The Epstein emails, the correspondence with Maxwell, the photographs, the social calendars, the party guest lists, all of it becomes fair game for examination. Every connection, every gathering, every communication she ever had with those two individuals could be examined under oath by Wolff's attorneys. That is a nightmare scenario for someone who has been trying to distance herself from that world while simultaneously refusing to flatly deny that she knew those people well. And the deposition would not stop at Epstein and Maxwell. Wolff's team would absolutely want to dig into the residency question under oath. They would ask her where she sleeps, where she eats breakfast, where she keeps her personal belongings, how many nights a month she spends in New York versus Florida, how many nights a month she spends at Mar-a-Lago, how often she stays at Trump Tower, what interactions she has with building staff, and every single answer would be given under penalty of perjury. One wrong answer, one statement that contradicts evidence Wolff already has, one discrepancy between her testimony and the doorman's recollection, or the social media post, or the email chain from 2002. And the situation escalates from a civil lawsuit into something far more serious. This is precisely why, in my opinion, she has not submitted a sworn declaration about her residency. Because the moment she swears to something, she is locked in. She cannot change her story later. She cannot adjust her answers. She cannot hide behind lawyers and press releases and public statements. And if Wolff's evidence about her New York life is as strong as he suggests, a sworn declaration could expose her to serious legal jeopardy. Wolff himself makes this argument explicitly in his latest court filing. He says that Melania's refusal to provide any sworn statement is not an accident. It is not a tactical oversight. It is a deliberate choice. He calls it a withholding of information so obvious and so conspicuous that the court should draw what lawyers call an adverse inference. That legal doctrine means that when someone refuses to provide evidence they clearly have access to, you are allowed to conclude that the evidence would have hurt their case. The silence itself becomes evidence. The refusal to swear to anything becomes an admission. And the judge should treat that refusal accordingly when making rulings. So what is Wolff asking the court to do at this stage? Two things, essentially. First, he wants the case sent back to state court, where it belongs, because Melania has failed to provide any legitimate factual basis for moving it to federal court. She has provided no sworn evidence of her residency. She has provided no declaration. She has provided nothing that a judge can rely on to make a jurisdictional finding. Second, Wolff offers the judge an alternative. If you think this is genuinely close, if you think there is a real factual dispute about where Melania lives, then let us take discovery and resolve it. Let me depose her. Let me ask her these questions under oath. Let me present the doorman testimony and the social media posts and the Epstein emails and the Sweet Pea correspondence and make her respond to all of it on the record. Either way, Wolff wins that argument. Either the case goes back to state court where discovery is available, or discovery opens up a window into Melania's life that her legal team clearly does not want opened. It is a brilliant legal trap, and with every filing her team makes, with every delay tactic and every refusal to provide sworn statements, she walks deeper into it. Now let us step back for a moment and look at the bigger picture, because the procedural details can sometimes obscure what is really at stake here. Melania Trump is the First Lady of the United States. She presides over official functions at the White House. She represents this country on the world stage. She sits in meetings with foreign leaders and diplomats and heads of state, and simultaneously, She is in federal court trying to use her Secret Service protection as an excuse to avoid being served with a lawsuit. She is refusing to sign sworn statements about something as basic as her home address. She is abandoning a billion-dollar defamation threat the moment the legal process started moving in an uncomfortable direction. These things cannot all be true without raising serious questions about what is really going on here. If Wolff genuinely defamed her, if his claims about her connections to Epstein and Maxwell are genuinely false and damaging to her reputation, why has she not filed her own lawsuit? She still has not. Not in New York, not in Florida, not anywhere. She threatened it loudly and publicly. She gave him a deadline. She told the world she would drag him into court. That deadline came and went. The lawsuit never materialized. And the longer this goes on, the more that silence speaks for itself. A person with a clean record and a strong legal case does not typically threaten to sue for $1 billion and then quietly let the threat expire. A person does that when they realize that filing a defamation lawsuit means opening themselves up to the very discovery process they are trying desperately to avoid. Wolff's strategic decision to keep his damages low is particularly revealing about his true intentions. It tells you that he is not in this for a payday. He is not trying to extract a settlement. He is in this to make a point, to establish a legal precedent, to send a message that journalists cannot be silenced by wealthy and powerful people wielding the threat of ruinous litigation. By keeping the financial stakes modest on his end, he strips away every procedural excuse Melania's team might use to get the case thrown out on jurisdictional grounds. He has constructed a trap with no visible escape hatch, and she is walking right into it with every filing her lawyers make. There is also something deeply telling about the timing of all this. The Epstein files continue to surface. Documents keep coming out. Connections between the Epstein network and various powerful figures are being examined in ways they never were before. Against that backdrop, a lawsuit that puts Melania's relationship with Maxwell and Epstein directly at issue, with real discovery powers, with deposition rights, with the ability to subpoena documents and emails and phone records, is not just legally inconvenient, it is potentially catastrophic. Because whatever Wolff has already publicized, discovery could uncover things that have not been publicized yet. Things that have been sitting in email servers or on hard drives or in the memories of people who have never been asked to testify under oath. The fact that her team is willing to engage in what appears to be fairly transparent forum shopping, rather than simply submitting a clean, sworn declaration about her residence, suggests they are not willing to subject anything about her life to the scrutiny of sworn testimony. Not her address, not her travel patterns, not her social calendar, not her emails, not her friendships, nothing. At the end of the day, what you are watching unfold in real time is a powerful person who made a very loud threat, discovered that the threat had consequences she was not prepared for, and has since been doing everything possible to slow down, redirect, and ultimately avoid the legal process she herself set in motion. From dodging service of process, to refusing sworn statements, to attempting to move the case across state lines to a friendlier judicial environment, the pattern is consistent. And patterns matter in law just as they matter in life. When every single move someone makes is designed to delay and obscure rather than confront and resolve, that tells you something. It tells you that facing this lawsuit on the merits is not something they are prepared to do. And when the person refusing to face it is the First Lady of the United States, in a case touching on her connections to one of the most notorious criminal networks in modern history, the stakes of that evasion could not possibly be higher. So we will keep watching this one closely, because the next move belongs to a federal judge in New York who has to decide whether this case stays or goes. And depending on what that judge decides, the legal walls around Melania Trump in this matter could start closing in very, very fast. Stay tuned.